Alright guys, welcome into Rock Solid Sports. I'm Morgan Hoover, joined today by Cody McClure and Sumner Gillum. And guys, Tennessee is going to Missouri this weekend, and with everything happening at Mizzou lately, how do we think this game is going to play out?
It's going to be an emotional high for Mizzou players, definitely. They went to Arrowhead Stadium last week to play BYU Cougars. Had an emotional victory after finding out that Gary Pinkel was retiring due to health concerns with being diagnosed with lymphoma back in May. And so they returned back home to Farragut Field where it's going to be an emotional game, and you should expect a packed house for the most part, and Mizzou players are going to probably bring it.
Back at home, first time since the protests, since Gary Pinkel announced that he's stepping down at the end of the season. This is big because of the emotional appeal. Gary Pinkel's final game, he's been at Missouri for 15 years. This is his last game at home at Farrow Field in Columbia. So I think there's definitely an emotional appeal. How does Tennessee handle that? That's the big question. Also, how does Missouri handle it?
Right, so going off of that, I know we're going to be looking at some key Tennessee players, but do we know any Missouri players? It's been a dramatic couple of weeks there. Do we know, what players we need to look at? What's going to be going on there?
I think a player to look at that most fans would be surprised is Drew Lock. How is he going to perform? He had a pretty decent game against BYU. Finally kind of getting his confidence. He's a freshman quarterback filling in for Matty Mock, who was suspended from the team, is not going to return back from the season. So he's kind of having to become a leader and step up in the spotlight pretty early in his college football career. And so look for Tennessee to try to make him as uncomfortable as possible, and he's one of my keys to the game.
The key area for me for Missouri is up front, Charles Harris and the rest of the defensive line for the Tigers. They are getting after quarterbacks. It's the strong point of the defense. They haven't been good offensively, but they're playing very well. One of the best defenses in the country statistically. I'm looking for those guys. They gave Tennessee's offensive line a ton of trouble 2 years ago and last year. If they can get around Tennessee's O-line, Josh Dobbs could be in trouble. He's going to have to get rid of the ball quick and make good decisions because Missouri's defensive line and their front seven in general is very good. Kentrell Brothers, also a linebacker, one of the SEC's best tacklers. So I want to see Mizzou's defense and how Tennessee matches up and blocks that front seven.
Right, so we talked about that. So what does Tennessee have to do in order to get this win on Saturday? What are we looking at them playing?
They're going to have to definitely play with more energy on the offensive side of the ball. You can see at North Texas, they just didn't have any energy. Dobbs wasn't himself. He only rushed for 4 times. It was later revealed that he's had a nagging foot that's kind of been bothering him. But they're going to have to bring the energy. The offensive line just couldn't stop the defensive line of a North Texas team who's now 1-9. So I'm really looking at, can Tennessee's offense bring that energy and fight for those extra yards like they really kind of haven't been in the past 2 weeks.
This game certainly comes down to Tennessee's offense against Missouri's defense. That's the key matchup here. Also, I want to see how Jalen Hurd performs this week. He hasn't really looked very good over the past few weeks. Dobbs has taken a lot of the heat, but Hurd, despite getting as many carries as he usually does, hasn't been running the ball very well. This is kind of like Alabama. They're not as good as Alabama, but as I mentioned, that front seven is stout. So I'm looking for Tennessee to do kind of what they did against the Crimson Tide. Get it to Alvin Kamara, get it to Von Pearson, and get outside on Missouri. I'm not sure Missouri has a guy who can pursue if you get outside on that defense. I think Tennessee has enough speed to have success there. So I look for the Volunteers, Jalen Hurd, and Alvin Kamara to have a big game. Dobbs needs to be effective running the football as well. Tennessee's offense has to play well to win this one.
Okay, guys, so moving on from that, we talked about this a little bit last week. Let's talk about some bowl predictions. After last week's bowl games, what are we looking at now?
Well, I think one of the key teams that's kind of not going for Tennessee in the Outback or going to the Outback Bowl is Arkansas. They've become a really hot team, really popular team that most bowl committees are going to start looking at. And so I'm actually changing my prediction to the Belk Bowl in North Carolina. I think Tennessee would be a very favorite for the Belk Bowl committee since they're so close. Only like a 2-hour drive, 2 or 3 hour drive to Charlotte, North Carolina. So that's one of the bowls I'm probably looking at if I'm Tennessee.
Sumner absolutely took the words out of my mouth on that one. The fact that Arkansas has won the last 2 weeks, they're kind of positioning themselves right now to be that number 3, possibly number 4 SEC team to get in a slot like the Outback Bowl. even if Tennessee wins 8 games, you got to think Arkansas wins out most likely against Mississippi State and Missouri. So I think Tennessee will maybe fall back on the hierarchy just a little bit. Belk Bowl, Charlotte, North Carolina seems like a pretty likely fit to me. I think they could play Florida State in that game. It would be an absolutely interesting game. Obviously, everybody remembers 1998. Tennessee beat Florida State for the national championship. It's been a while, but I think that could happen. North Carolina and Clemson are probably the 2 favorites out of the ACC. They're your playoff team and probably your New Year's Six team. So I think Florida State with 2 or 3 losses by then could be Tennessee's opponent in the Belk Bowl.
All right, guys, talk to me a little bit about college playoffs. What are we predicting is going to happen here?
Well, I do agree with the College Football Playoff Committee in keeping their top 4 for the most part. Like you said, with Iowa kind of being a joke last week, I kind of agree with that. I looked at their schedule and I laughed and said most teams in the top 20 would probably have an undefeated record.
Yeah.
So I do think they overrated Iowa for the most part. I think Oklahoma should be the number 5 team. I think they've proven that in and out, even though they had a really bad loss to Texas, which is really hurting them right now. I agree with most part of Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, and Notre Dame.
I really like the way that this is shaping up. As you said, committee sticking with their top 4. I love the top 4 right now. I'd be totally fine if it stayed this way until January. The only thing is, we know how college football is, especially Thanksgiving weekend, conference championship weekend. Something's going to go wrong. Clemson's going to drop a game. Alabama's going to lose to Florida. Something crazy is going to happen. But say it doesn't. Say it goes like it's going right now. Alabama's the team to beat, in my opinion. They're going to get in. The SEC champion's in, regardless. Even if it were Florida with 1 loss, they would be in. I think the ACC champion is also in. Had an interesting conversation earlier about North Carolina with 1 loss. I think they have climbed their way to a position where even they could get in, but obviously Clemson the favorite there. Ohio State is in if they win the Big Ten. What we've got now, basically the Pac-12 has played itself out of the college football playoff. I don't think you're going to see a Pac-12 team in it. But do you take the Independent and Notre Dame, or do you take, as it stands now, do you take the Big 12 champion without the conference championship game? Depends on what the Big 12 does if they beat up on each other in the coming weeks. I think if Oklahoma State runs the table and is undefeated, they'll be that 4th team. Notre Dame will fall out. However, if it's Oklahoma with a loss to Texas, here's your common opponent. Interesting right here. Notre Dame, Oklahoma. Common opponent, Texas. Notre Dame beat the Longhorns in week 1, 38-3. Oklahoma lost to Texas. I think that could factor into the committee's, the way that they judge these teams at the end of the year. But right now, I hope it stays just the way it is. Clemson, Alabama, Ohio State, Notre Dame. That would make for a fun postseason.
All right, so moving on from that, we've got some really awesome games this weekend. First, let's talk about LSU Ole Miss. What do we see there?
Big top 25 matchup. Both teams have kind of started off strong and then just kind of faded out quickly, especially LSU after the Alabama game. I'm actually going to go with LSU. I think Leonard Fournette has a pretty good game. The game is in Oxford, Mississippi, but I really just like LSU bouncing back from this.
Ole Miss has had 2 weeks to get ready for this game. They're at home. They've got the better defense. They've got the better quarterback. They've had time to look at the film and what Alabama and Arkansas did to shut down Fournette and LSU. Ole Miss is going to stack the box. LSU way too one-dimensional. Rebels win this one fairly easily, 23-14.
All right, well, let's look at some more games. Michigan and Penn State. Thoughts there?
Jim Harbaugh has done a phenomenal job at Michigan, really got that team ahead of schedule. They're already bowl eligible. I like Michigan. I think James Franklin just really hasn't performed like he did at Vanderbilt, producing that type of talent. I like Michigan 27-14.
I like Michigan as well. Not a lot to say about this game. It could get interesting. Penn State is one of those teams you just don't know a lot about. They can come out and play with about anybody in the country. They can also lose to about anybody in the country. Michigan has not been impressive lately. That defense that we thought was so good gave up half 100 to Indiana last week. I think it'll be a close game. I like Michigan to get it done, 27-20.
Okay, and USC is going to be taking on Oregon. What do we think is going to happen there?
Fight on. USC Trojans 30-14. Nothing really to say much. Oregon just hasn't been themselves this year.
Oregon has looked better the last few weeks, coming off of an emotional win over Stanford. Southern Cal also playing pretty good after beating Utah. They took a loss early in the year. I like USC in this game as well. High scoring, fun game to watch. Trojans 52-45 over Oregon.
Okay, now let's talk about Northwestern and Wisconsin. Do y'all have any predictions there?
Northwestern has been a very surprise team in the Big Ten. They beat a very good Stanford team first game of the season. I've liked them for the most part. I'm going Northwestern over Wisconsin 30-27.
I like Wisconsin to get it done. I think they are potentially the third best team in the Big Ten. In that division, I really still like Wisconsin more than I do Iowa, even though Iowa did beat them and they're undefeated. I think Iowa's a joke. I've made that clear. So I like Wisconsin to win this game. Tough game against Northwestern, 30-24.
Okay. And Michigan State will be going up against Ohio State. Predictions there.
You know, I've been known to be somewhat of an Ohio State supporter, but I'm actually going with Sparty on this one. I think Ohio State drops the ball. It's just one of those, it's not a trap game per se, but I think Ohio State's kind of overlooking it. They're excited they're still in the college football playoffs, even though they're ranked number 3 right now. I just think this is one they drop. I got Michigan State 40-30.
I think Ohio State is the second best team in the country behind Alabama. I know Clemson's playing well, but I think that Ohio State, when it's all said and done, they're a lot like Alabama. They've got the talent. They've got the best coach. They're going to find a way to win this game. The spread on this is 13, which is way too high in my opinion. But I do like Ohio State to beat Michigan State 31-21.
Okay. And we talked earlier a little bit about Arkansas, but how do we think they're going to do against Mississippi State this weekend?
I like Arkansas in this one. I think they've been on a hot streak. I don't see there's any reason to pick against them. They beat Ole Miss. They beat LSU. They're just beating teams right now, and they're doing it pretty handedly. Brett Bielema is actually backing up his talk for the most part. So I'm going with Arkansas on this one, 40-33 over the Bulldogs.
The Hogs have gotten a lot better in November for the past 2 years. This is a team that lost to Toledo and Texas Tech back in September. But I think everybody agrees they're a far different team right now. Love the way Arkansas is playing. They're physically dominating teams. They're going to keep that up this week. Mississippi State doesn't have enough playmakers. They've got the SEC's best quarterback, but now even De'Runnya Wilson is down at receiver. So I like Arkansas going away in this one, 34-17 in Fayetteville.
And A&M will be traveling to Vanderbilt this Saturday. What's going to happen there?
Lots of interesting predictions I've seen. I've seen one report saying that Vandy's going to win 15-14, which is an odd score, but it is Vanderbilt who can't really score. But I'm going with Texas A&M. I like Kyler Murray. I just like the Texas A&M offense. Even though the Vanderbilt defense has proved their own, I got Texas A&M 24-10.
This is my upset special of the week. I like Vanderbilt in this game because they're playing at home and they've got the better defense. If A&M could figure out the quarterback situation and get some offense going, they would win this game, understandably. But when you look at their last 2 losses, they scored 3 points against Ole Miss, lost 23-3. They scored 10 and lost to Auburn, whose defense is terrible. 13 combined points in 2 losses to average SEC West teams. That prolific Texas A&M offense right now is a myth. I like Vanderbilt to shut them down in Nashville. I've got the Commodores 19-17.
Okay. And Baylor and Oklahoma State will be competing this weekend. What's going on there?
Baylor's coming off a pretty heartbreaking, probably their playoff chances over loss. But there is still a slim chance. I don't think Oklahoma State is as good as the record shows, even though they are undefeated. I like Baylor in this. I think they're playing an emotional game where they feel like they have to play for the college football playoff lives. I like them going into Oklahoma State and beating them pretty handily. I got 40-24.
Major shootout. Baylor gets it done in the end, even with a quarterback who's not quite as good. I like Oklahoma State's quarterback better, but Baylor, the more experienced team, they're looking to mess things up in the Big 12, and they're going to this weekend. They'll beat Oklahoma State 55-54. Close one.
And lastly, last team we're going to talk about today, TCU and Oklahoma. What's happening there?
I like Boomer Sooner. Baker Mayfield making himself a Heisman candidate, rightfully so. We saw what he did against Tennessee. There was potential of 10 sacks in that game for Tennessee. He just gets away. He makes the plays. I like Baker Mayfield. You saw him against Baylor. He's just a really phenomenal quarterback. Probably the best quarterback no one's really talking about until now. I like Oklahoma in this game big, 50-20.
Sumner and I are on the same page here. Boomer Sooner, big time in this game. Trevon Boykin is still questionable, likely to miss this game. You saw TCU struggle last week, getting away with a 6-point win over Kansas. Oklahoma's defense is stout. They're playing really good right now. I like the Sooners 41-10.
Okay, guys, and coming back to the Tennessee and Mizzou, what are your final score predictions here?
I like Tennessee in this one. I think they finally get the energy up, but I think it's going to be closer than most people think, even though some people are thinking it's going to be pretty close. I got Tennessee 30 to Mizzou 20.
I do think it's going to be a close game, low-scoring game. Mizzou covers the spread, but the Vols will get it done. Close in Columbia. I like Tennessee 20-13.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for tuning in to Rock Solid Sports. Don't forget to check us out on Mondays and Fridays on 90.3 The Rock.